came in slowly here. Just give me one little.
Okay, go on.
Here to Shvuto, welcome everyone. As is our custom, we're first going to locate ourselves in the Sefer. The Sefer is built in a very progressive, logical and progressive way, starting from the basics of analysis, which is the statement, and building itself up through syllogisms and finally through proofs. And that's going to be the headlines here. You have propositions, syllogisms, and proofs. So the first, the reason why we have these three boxes, because the Ramchal explains that the Ma'aseh Matan, the give and take, the debating process in the Gemara really can be broken down into these three basic mental processes. So, Baruch Hashem, last time we finished a discussion of Havanas Mamarim, the understanding of statements in all their parts, and today we're going to do the second fundamental process of analysis, which is called producing syllogisms. Okay, get over there. Okay, there we go. So the second part that we'll be dealing with is the production of syllogisms, and over here. And then finally, we're going to do the last part of the Sefer, which is a discussion of how to bring proof or disproof to any statement or syllogism. That's the foundation of the Sefer. Today's class will be focused, as we said, on syllogisms, and we're going to learn about 5 different syllogisms. And that's going to be pretty exhaustive. That's going to be the total list of syllogisms. And this is a workhorse of learning, because from here, a syllogism, you can expand a simple case, for instance, to include many cases. It's a question of a classical syllogism, where we start off with an oral statement, for instance. So any prat, any detail in that category will have the same nasu. That's going to be called a mofti, based on the oral statement. Then we're going to concentrate on the what he calls comparative statement, and we'll be using that in order to make singular cases expand by saying case A is equal to case B, and therefore if case A has a certain law, then case B will have a certain law. That's called a binyan, or the extension of that is a kal v'chomer, that case B is even greater than case A. So if a certain law is predicated to case A, then kol sheken, it will be predicated to case B, or vice versa, depending. That could be a chomer, kal v'chomer. And then we'll discuss the if-then statement, which is the basis of the Hekesh Totally, if A then B, and we'll study the rules of that syllogism, if A then B, if A therefore B, and if not B therefore A. And finally, we'll do the Hekesh Machalek, which is based on the Machalek statement, which means that no say the subject A has no say X or Y. So if I can discover that it does have no say X, it doesn't have Y, and if I can discover that it doesn't have no say Y, it does have no say X. So we'll be going into the workhorse of expansion and a proof called a syllogism today. Let's go to our text. Perek Zayin, the 7th Perek. Hine ad heina ba'anu hayisod harishon shehu havanas hamamarim. It says the Ramchal, up to this point we have explained the first principle of thought, which is called how to understand statements. Ata nevarah yisod hasheni shehu that Hulavus had told us. Now we're going to talk about the second foundation of thinking, which is to take statements and build and create telagos, conclusions from our statements. Tevis bonus no saying, Shika she yomar nasu echad b'nose echad, kol ma shenichlal o mischaber be'emes b'nose ahu yomar b'ose nose. The nature of thinking is such that when you say there's a particular predicate predicated to a particular subject, then everything that's included or associated in truth with that predicate will have that subject. V'chein, kol ma shenichlal b'oso hanose. Also, anything that is included in the category of the subject, then yomar ba'ose hanasu will have that predication. מעל פי השורש הזה, כשנשמע מאמר מן המאמרים, יוולדו לנו ממנו מאמרים הרבה. According to this foundation, when we hear a statement, we'll be able to produce many, many other statements. Kulam nimshachim be'emes min hamamahu. All of them really a consequent of the first statement. Shishamanu v'neklayim bo, because they're the first statement which we heard, and they're all included in that first statement. Kederech sheniklalim hapratim be'klaleim. In the same manner that particulars are included in the whole. So whenever I have a class statement, a classical statement, an all statement, I say all Jews have a chelik in olam haba. That represents Shimon, Reuven, Levi, all the Jews in the world. So I can say that once I identify one of the particular members of the class, Shimon, so then he'll have the predicate a chelik in olam haba, portion in the world to come. And that's the basis of the first type of syllogism. Derech Mashal. He's going to give us an example.
Yeah, but in that example that you just said,
yes.
So how does it work the other way? He says,
so anything you can say about olam haba, you'll say about all the particulars in the statement. Let's say olam haba has various levels depending upon what you attain in this world. So then all Jews will have a chelik in olam haba, which has various levels depending upon their attainment in this world. Okay? So that is the foundation. Whatever is included in the subject has to have that predicate, and whatever we say about the predicate has to be said about all the members in the class. Here's a classic example. Shemanu she'ose av malacha b'Shabbos chayav skila. We heard in Shabbos, also in Sanhedrin, that anyone that does a principal category of work on Shabbos is chayav skila. Good. That's a simple stam statement with a klali subject, correct? Hine noda will be able to then understand. Shekol mashu av malacha. Anything that's in the category of av malacha, yesh bo inyan shel chayav skila. Anything that we describe as an av malacha, then we'll have to have the predicate of skila. Me'ata, now. Kol ma'aseh dahiyos av malacha neda badai sheyesh bo chayav skila. So now the consequent is that any activity which we're going to define as an av malacha, so then it's going to have skila. And what can we produce as a new statement? Shahakose b'Shabbos chayav skila. So it must be that the one who writes on Shabbos is chayav skila, or shahalash chayav skila. One who makes dough on Shabbos is chayav skila. V'chein kulam. Why? This is similar with all of them. Ki kol elu nichlalim b'nosei hamama hu da'ainu ha'osei malacha. So I made a little chart here. Some people use Venn diagrams. This is a very illustrative chart of what the Ramchal says. Our subject in the statement was that was Av Malacha b'Shabbos. And we said that all of them, all of these Av Malachas, everything in this category, is going to have a predicate called Chayev Skila. So this blue circle is included in the predicate called Chayev Skila. Now I make the predicate Chayev Skila larger because you never know in any statement the relationship of the predicate to the subject, i.e. all A is B doesn't mean all B is A. It could just be some B is A, right? If I say all men are Jews, it doesn't mean that all Jews are men. It just means that some Jews have to be men, but not all of them. So I always make my predicate, in this case in red, larger than the subject because that's the only thing that's mukhrach. It actually sometimes is going to be equivalent to the subject. If I say all Jews are obligated to, or male Jews are obligated to have bris milah, all those that have bris milah happen to be Jews. So sometimes it does work out, but the only thing that's mukhrach is that at least some in the predicate have the subject. So that's why I make the Av Malach b'Shabbos always in a larger predicate called Chayev Skila. Good. So that's our original statement. So all the Av Malachas have to be in this circle, in this box called Chayev Skila. So once I identify Kosev, writing on Shabbos, as a prat of the Av Malacha, since it's included in that class, so obviously you'll have to have the predicate, okay? And the same thing we could say about the predicate. If I describe anything in this predicate, so since all the Av Malachas are in that predicate of Chayev Skila, so anything I say about Chayev Skila has to refer to everything in the category of Kol Malacha b'Shabbos. Okay, here's another example of the other side where the predication is going to be described, and we're going to say since the predication is a predication of the subject, its description also will be the same. V'chein, ilu shemanu mamra sha'izmil shel milah hu muksa. So we have a subject, a stam statement, that the Izmil, the Milah knife, is muksa. Hine, kol mashir, lanu hiyoso mischabel and asuze shel muksa. Anything that we find out is attached to the concept of muksa, tidom, lisafik, himself, Izmil shel milah. So without any doubt, it'll be applicable to the subject of Milah. So therefore, when we find out that muksa is asa b'tiltul, you can't move muksa on Shabbos. So then we can generate this new concept that the Izmil, the Milah knife on Shabbos, is also asa b'tiltul. So again, I made our little diagrams here. We have the Izmil of Shabbos. That's the subject. And we're saying that it has the predicate of being muksa. Now, anything that we say about muksa now will have to be said about the subject. So once we say that muksa is in the category of asa b'tiltul, so we're back again to our original subject, which is Izmil shel milah, also has to be asa b'tiltul because it's found within the category of muksa, which itself is found within the category of asa b'tiltul. So that's the foundation of making hekation. Let's go a little further here. Hine hamama harishon shemimenu yimoshech hashemi nikra hadama. The first statement from which the second statement is going to be a consequent of is called the Hagdama, or the premise in English, from the word pre. So it's the original statement, the pre-statement. Hanimshach nikra toda. What's derived from that original statement is called the tolada, or the consequent. Vehuladas hatolada mehagdamasa nikra hekesh. And when we do this process of creating this child, or this consequent from the premise, it's going to be called a hekesh. So those are the three parts of a syllogism. We have the original proposition, and we have the middle term, and we have the final term, which is called the tolada, the result. So the result is always by finding something that's in the klal or something that's in the predicate, and then just simply saying, since it's included in either the subject or the predicate, then it has to have the converse subject or predicate. When it's in the format that we've just learned, all Malachas Shabbos Chayav Misa, Kosev is an Amalacha, therefore Kosev is Chayav Misa. When it starts with that type of format, it's called a classical syllogism. Why is it called classical? Because it is made up of a class. Okay, the class of all things which are Malachas of Shabbos. Once I predicate something in that class, so then any member of the class will have the same predication. Gulam hine roa shehem shektalada zu bom hios nasu hataloda mischabe be'emes el nasu hagdama o nosei ha tolada nikla tachas nosei hagdama. This is a very, very important little rule. It's critical in understanding the validity of syllogisms, and it says the following. You'll see that the consequent of a tolda comes either because the predication of the tolda is attached in truth to the predicate of the Hagdama. In other words, it has to be really true that in the case, let's go with this Ismail, that it's really, the Ismail is, that Muksa is also total, okay? It has to be that. And in order to get the result that the Ismail is also talto, it has to be that really Muksa is also talto. So this little predicate here of asotato has to in truth be attached to muksa before we can say that the Ismail is also asotato. And the opposite way around, when it came to the subject, it has to be true that Kosev is really a prat of the category of Malacha. If someone would disagree with that and say it's not, so then we can no longer say that Kosev B'Shabbat is Chayav Skila. So that's his very, very important horah note. And this is really when it comes in the debating process, and we're going to learn later on about proofs. So when we talk about kashas that are based on the Hekesh Mofti, a lot of times they will fall down because the middle term is not is either a machlokas or is not mukhrach. Okay, and therefore the whole syllogism will fall down. Okay, so that's what he says here. He says that the subjects, in the types included in a class of subject has to be there in truth, and conversely, in order for the syllogism to work, and conversely, anything we say about the predicate has to be said there and has to be there all the time in truth. If not, we're going to break down the consequences. The timsa she'ein nasu hatolada nichlal o mischaber be'hechrach the tamid benasu hagdama hine hatolada lo tivoda. So if we find that what we said about the predicate is not really true, so then the whole solution will fall down. he's going to give an example of both types, subject and predicate, Hekesh Mofti's classical syllogisms, and how what we call the middle term, once we have a machlokus about it or disagree with it, the whole syllogism will fall down. Derech mashal, mishavat from Shabbos. We had a proposition, shahabara is an av malacha. We said that lighting a fire in Shabbos is an av malacha. Vishamata, we heard Shekola Osei Av Malacha, the Shabbos Chayev Misa. Anyone that does an Av Malacha on Shabbos is Chayev Misa. So we were going to make a Hekesh Mofti and come to the understanding that Hamaber is Chayev Misa. But then you heard that Rabbi Yossi Omer She'eino Av Malacha. There's someone who holds, that's Rabbi Yossi, that lighting a fire is not called an malacha. Hine lo tolid od shahmavir yechayev misa. So we can no longer make the conclusion that the mavir is chayev misa. So the hekeshim are classically drawn in 3 lines. The first line is called the premise, and the second line is called the middle term, and the third line is called the conclusion. That's classically how we format hekeshim. So in that case, we said Kol Osei Av Malacha Shabbos, which is the subject, is Chayev Misa. We predicated Chayev and the Chiyuv Misa to anyone that does a work of Shabbos. So then we said, we can identify a prat in Av Malacha. We say Havara is an Av Malacha. So that's the middle term. And therefore, what will come out is that Havara, Hamavir is Chayev Misa. Now this, that Hamavir is Chayev Misa, the new information that we derived from the premise, is only true if Havara is an Av Malacha. But according to Rabbi Yossi, that Havara is not an Av Malacha. So we can no longer derive that Mavir is Chayev Misa. And this is going to be classic. We're going to find that premise, the middle premise, is something that not everyone agrees with. It's a machlokus. There's a different parish that puts it into a different getter. When in our example we said muksa is asa b'tiltul, v'chashavta shetiltul min atzad yegam kein asa, and we thought that tiltul min atzad, moving something, not lifting it up, but just moving it with the side of your hand, pushing it over, we thought that's also in the predicate of tiltul. And then later we discovered that pushing something on the side and not lifting it up is not called moving it, not called tiltul. So hine lo tidon od shiyeh muksa asa l'taltul min atzad. Then we can no longer say that muksa is asa to move with the side of your hand. So again, this is of course my diagram, so I made it in gray. We set up the premises in the following way, and this time we will be talking about the predicate. What? Ha-muksa asa b'tiltul. We're saying about muksa that it's asa b'tiltul. Now we're going to say that tiltul min atzad. Who tiltul? That's what we thought. We thought that the predicate tiltul included moving, included not only lifting things up, but just moving it with sideways with your hand, pushing it. And we wanted to then make a consequent that muksa is asa b'tiltul min atzad. We wanted to say that muksa, therefore, is asa b'tiltul min atzad, since we thought that that was included in the concept of tiltul. Then we found out that tiltul min atzad ain't shmo tiltul, and we found out that really, although tiltul just means to move an object, we discovered that it means lifting it and not just moving it on the side. That's not considered tiltul, moving it on sideways. So then we can no longer derive the consequent and muksa asa b'tiltul min atzad. So that's the first rule.
The first example.
Mm-hmm.
The first example he was showing you how the Hamina was part of the no say, and then the Maskana was that Rav Yossi holds it's not, and the second example was the Hamina was that the Tizul Mitzvah is part of the Nasu, and then Maskana that it's not. So we're showing you both
100%.
sides, right?
Right, right. You should know that in all the Ramchal's books, this one and the other one that Hashem will get to, he always gives you the abstract concept, and then he gives you his examples following, spelling it out. So here he told us about the concept of the subject and the predicate have to, whatever you, in other words, particularly in the subject, it has to be there in truth. If someone disagrees with it, then the Toledo will fall out. And if you have something attached to the predicate that is not there according to certain people, then also the Hemshech, the conclusion, will also fall down. Okay. Yeah, that's it. So that's the first rule. But in order to make a Hekesh Mofti, you better be sure that what you're saying is in the subject or attached to the predicate is really there. Because if it's not, or there in a certain bechin, in a certain aspect, then you're not going to be able to produce your syllogism properly. That's called the fallacy of the middle term, for those people that want to know the classic name for this move. Okay, middle term meaning either something is always in the subject or predicated to the predicate. So if that's wrong, if it's not there all the time in truth, or not there in every aspect, the aspect you're interested in, so then the middle term falls down. Okay. And then therefore the consequent falls down. So that's the first basic rule in syllogisms. That's how syllogisms are attacked and broken by destroying that middle term. In this middle term, you'll find that a lot of mistakes creep into the thinking of human beings. Why? We thought originally, as you said, we thought there was a havamina that this thing wasn't koseg, lighting fires were included in the subject of Al-Mabach. Later on, we find that's not true. Rabbi Yossi says not so. V'gam yipulu hamachlokes v'hefresh ben ha-svaras. Also, machlokeses will be based on this middle term fight, whether it's there or not. As we saw, Yossi says it's not there. Other people say it is there. And also svaras. It may be that it's, some people hold it's just common sense. It's reasonable to say a certain something is nichlal in a subject, and other people say, no, it doesn't make sense to me. So you'll have a lot of times a fight about this middle term, and therefore the consequence will be under the debate. V'al kain yakora she'echad yolid toleda achas v'acher yachisha. Therefore, because of this difference in either svara or pesukim about whether this middle term really is equivalent, you'll find that this will be the basis of a lot of machlokeses where one person will say it is there, and therefore we can make the conclusion. The other person will say it's not there, and therefore he'll deny the conclusion. So a lot of the debating process, when you recast it into its primary syllogistic form, will be able to identify that they're arguing over this middle term. Od b'tevet zvonasu shahadomim yilamdu zemizeh. Now we're going to go to the second type of hekesh, built on the statement of dimion, of similarity between two subjects. Instead of having the categorical, the classical syllogism that we just mentioned above, we're going to do it by saying that two cases are equal to each other. Once they're equal to each other, so then the predicate of A will fall into the predicate of statement B. Let's see how he spells that out. Also, the nature of thinking is that things which are similar, we can learn one thing from its similar case. Perish. She'im matzanu shnei nosim domim. If we find two subjects which are similar, umatzanu be'echad mihem meforish nosu echad, and we find in one of those subjects clearly written a certain predicate, b'din himotzei hanosu ahu gamisheni. It must be that that predicate is also in the second case. Afal pisha lo perishbo, even though it's not written there clearly. V'nikra binyan av or ma mitzinu. This is called a binyan av or a ma mitzinu. The binyan av, well, yes, spell it out. Wasn't it a binyan av and a ma mitzinu? A binyan av is when we take a particular case and we say it represents a classic case, and the ma mitzinu just says this particular case is equal to the other case, and therefore the law can be moved over. So, for instance, when we're talking about An Nezikin, famous Mishnah in Nezikin, with the Arba Abbas, the Shor, the Bor, and the Mav, and the Heather, even though the Torah spoke about a ox goring another ox, that was the particular case that's spoken of in the Chumash, but we said that when the ox kicks another ox and damages him, since kicking is equal to the case of goring, because they both have this quality of kavanah lahazik, that means intent to do damage of the animal, so therefore the rule that you have to pay as the owner will be the same. That's called making a particular case. Actually, there I used it as a mamitzina, but really we're going to learn that the case of shor, the animal that gores, really is a categorical case representing all things that have kavanah lahazik. Okay, so that's called a binyan av. We take a particular case, we say it represents the category, as opposed to saying two cases are equal and therefore their results. And he's going to give some examples too. V'chein al derech zeh nidon mihapochos al yoter ol lahefech. Also, we're going to learn from the lesser to the greater, or from the greater to the lesser, what we guess we'll call kal v'chomer. V'hainu she'im matzanu nasu b'nosei shehu pachos michavaro. If we find a predication in a certain subject that's less than another subject, and it's fitting, a very important word, fitting, and it's fitting to be found in the subject which is greater than it, nidon hiospo, then we'll say it's there. V'chein miha yoter pachos, v'sein yikra kol shekain v'kal v'choma. This is called the kol shekain, so much more so, or the kal v'chomer, or chomer v'kal, which he doesn't say the reverse, but we also can learn, as he explained, in both directions. Derech mashal, he's going to give some examples. So this really is a subcategory of the domain. We're saying that two cases are not only similar, but one represents a greater or lesser reason to have that predicate. Okay, let's look at his examples. Derech mashal. Amru, it says, Yachid mutza miklal tzibor. The korban yachid is not in the category of a korban tzibor. There's the korban yachid over here in blue, and it's outside the category of korban tzibor. Very good. Now, nasi mutza miklal tzibor. Also, the nasi is similar. Korban of the nasi that he has to bring is also not a korban tzibor. So, since these two cases, the korban yachid and the korban nasi, are similar in the aspect that they're not in the category of the korban tzibor, they do not have that predication. It's a member sholel. So then we can say like this: Ma yachid may be ashim totally. just like the Yachid, this individual person will bring an Ashim Talui, and Ashim Talui means if it's a chatos, you don't know if you ate chaylev or not. You had two pieces of meat, and one you knew was chaylev, one you didn't know was chaylev. You didn't know which one you ate. That's called a talui, like the Easter is suspended. So you have to bring that. So the nasi, afa nasi, may be ashim talui. Since he also is not a tzibor, he's a type of yachid, he's comparable to the yachid, so he should also be bring the ashim talui. So that's the first type of hekesh that we learned through Dimyon. Now, of course, if he's going to explain later on, if it's not true that being excluded from Tzibor is enough to make these two cases equivalent, so then, of course, the result will be destroyed also. But in the positive aspect of building up the comparison, once we say two things are comparable, so then they have to have the same result. So if I say that Be'ita is comparable to Negicha, kicking is comparable to goring, so then goring, which is a given predication, which is chayev, if you damage to goring, so then we can say the same predication, move it down to the case of kicking. So that's called the hekesh mofte through dimyon, through comparison. Now he'll show us the kal v'chomer, an example. Ukesha amru and tos kahanim, and I made just a little chart just to make our premises a little clearer. Uma im hayachid she'en mevi hivodo zacha mevi ashim talui nasi she'mevi al hivodo zacha eno din she'ovi ashim talui. So here we have another way that the Gemara is now going to prove that the nasi should bring a ashim talui, but this time, it's not only going to be through comparison, it's going to say that the two cases represent one being even more chumrah than the other. Why? Because we have the yachid, it doesn't bring al hivod the ozach, it doesn't bring when the avera is discovered, he doesn't bring first it was no shogeg, then it becomes discovered later, he doesn't bring a korban zachar. But he does bring the ashim talui. So you see, it's a weaker case, the case of Yochid, because the Nasi, he brings when he does find out about the Avera, Shemevi al Hivo Del Zocher. So he's much more machmir, the Nasi, than the Yochid. So then definitely he's going to have what the Yochid has. He's not going to bring the Ashim Talui. Excuse me, he is going to bring the Yashim Talui. Ain't no din, I'm sorry. Yibade will bring Yashim Talui. Okay, so that's the process of Kal V'chomer. It's a step beyond the comparison because it says not only the two subjects compared, but they represent one being more strict than the other. So anything that the minor case will have, the less strict case will have, so then the more strict certainly have it. So that's the case of Kal V'chomer. Now he warns us. V'hine im timsa shenosim shechavto hiyosam domin eino domin be'emes tivotel hatol. If we see that what we thought was comparable was not comparable, mola consequently, then the consequent in technical terms will be destroyed. V'chein im timsa she'oso chashavto pachoso yoter eino pachoso yoter tivotel talada. If what you thought was greater, lesser, or greater or lesser, doesn't have that relationship, so then you no longer can produce the result. That's the second way to destroy a hekesh through comparison. If it's a simple comparison, destroy the comparison between the two subjects, the statement falls down. If it's a kal v'chomer, say, no, it's not true, one is more kal v'chomer, and then the result will fall down. And here's the third way. Ve'im timso nose acher doma lenose hanidon she'ein bo nasu ahu tivotel told the bracha. If you find a third case which is equal to the case we're trying to prove, but doesn't have that result, so you no longer can produce the consequent. So in our case, if we found something similar to the Nasi without the din of that he has to bring, we found a similar case where the Ashim Torah is not brought, and that's equal to the Nasi, that will also knock out the Kal V'chomer. So even though we didn't upset the relationship between Yachid and Nasi by saying that Nasi is not really more Chomer in this case than the Yachid, all we have to do is find a similar case to the Nidon, something similar to Nasi that doesn't have the predication, and then, even though we don't know why, we can no longer, we must per se say it's no longer Mukhrach that the predication is there. So these are three very, very important rules to remember. It's again used all the time in the Masamatan and the Gemara, and it's the basis of destroying syllogisms. Okay, so the syllogism stood, if it was a Madonna type syllogism through comparison, it stood on the strength of the comparison. If it was Kal V'chomer, it stood on the strength of the Kal V'chomer. And the third one is very, very eloquent because it says if you find a case equal to the case you're trying to derive that doesn't have that din, even though we don't know why, but we can no longer say the hechvach, it's there. There must be some other factor avoiding it. That's appear on the Kal V'chomer. Okay, now he's going to go through a few of these examples of what he just said, A, B, and C. Let's see. Derech Mashal. We thought we wanted to learn the case of Tzibur from the given case of Nasi. So the Shas says, no, Tzibur mi Nasi lo asa. No, you can't derive Tzibur from Nasi. Why? The Ikal Mifrach. Mal Nasi shechen yesh Karbano nekeva nimsa. Okay, because the Nasi, which we thought was more machmir, then the Yachid is actually not more machmir, because there's a certain case where he's more mako, because he brings a nekeva, which the Yachid doesn't bring, a female, which is nothing but nimsa she'en hatzibu of a nasi dom and behemes. So now we can't say what we find in the tzibur is equivalent to the nasi, because we found a place where they're different. So remember, this is the first rule. He said, hekeshim that are based on similarity of subjects, if we find that the subjects are not similar in truth, so then the hekesh is going to fall down. So here we thought that the nasi was equal to the tzibur, and therefore, the tzibur is equal to the nasi. The Gemara says, no, it's not true. The tzibur is not equal to the nasi, and therefore the result is that we can't learn any case of the tzibur from the nasi because they're not equivalent anymore. That's the first rule. Domin, they're not domin. Now we're going to do the second rule. We're going to show that the Kal V'chomer is not really Kal V'chomer. V'chein, keshilamdu mi Kal V'chomer, nasi mi Mashiach. The Gemara wants to learn in Harais the case of Nasi from Mashiach. And what does it say? Uma Mashiach, shemevi hataso mishavar, ein mevi al hakodmos. We're talking about the Kohen Mashiach here. The Kohen Mashiach brings a sin offering after he is no longer the Kohen Mashiach, after he left the office. But he doesn't bring a sin offering on sins that happened before he was ordained the Kohen Gadol, Kohen HaMashiach, Kohen Gadol. So the Nasi, she'en mevi chatosa mishavah, the Nasi that doesn't bring chatos after he leaves his office, eino din shelo yavi al hakodmos. Isn't it kal v'chomer that he shouldn't bring chatos on sins that he did before he became a Nasi? So, so we see that the Mashiach brings the chatos on the avar after he leaves office. The Nasi doesn't bring that such a chatos. So he's more meko than the Mashiach. So if the more machmir one, the Mashiach, that brings the chatos on after leaving office, has the kula that he doesn't bring on any chatos he did before entering the office, so certainly the Nasi that doesn't bring the chatos before he came to office, he's much weaker. He's definitely not going to bring, when he leaves the office, he doesn't bring a chatos for anything that he did during his term. So certainly anything he did before his term that he's not going to bring. So that's the kal v'chomer. But the Gemara breaks up.
This would be a frame of a cow, right? This would actually be a frame of a cow?
Yes, exactly. Yes. What the Chomer one doesn't do, so then if the Chomer one, in this case the Mashiach, doesn't have something, so then the more Kal one certainly doesn't have it. Okay, exactly, Chomer v'Kal. So it's true, Hakal v'Chomer v'Omer. No. Ma Mashiach shechein eino mevi b'shkagas ma'isa. We found a place where the Mashiach is not more Chomer. Why? Because he doesn't bring on a shkagas ma'isa when he does an activity b'shogeg. Tomer b'nasi shemevi b'shkagas ma'isa. The nasi is more machmir because he even brings the chatos on ma'isa that he did b'shogeg. So you see, in another aspect, we can say that the nasi is greater than Mashiach. If that's true, then we've destroyed our relationship of as you said, Chomer v'Kal here, and therefore we can no longer bring the consequent because we're not sure that it's a Chomer v'Kal here anymore, because in another aspect the tables are reversed. The Zemet May should be the Chila Chashavnu Hiyos Mashiach Yoter Minasi. In the beginning we thought the Mashiach was much more machmir than the Nasi. Valken Lamadnu, then therefore we drew the Kal v'Chomer. She'im hu eino mevi korban al chadamos. If he doesn't bring a korban on as I did before he came into office, Kol Shehein Nasi Shu Pachos Mimenu. Certainly, the Nasi, which is less than him, less strict than him, he's not going to bring any chatos on things that did before he became a Nasi. But then we found, in truth, that the Nasi not really is Pachos. Why? Because it has a tzad kumar, Shahare, the Bechina Acheres, in a certain aspect, he is greater than the Gon Mashiach. Therefore, we can no longer use a Kal v'Chomer and derive the din from one to the next. So this is a classic pircha in a Kal v'Chomer. We destroy the relationship. Here's the Chomer v'Kal. We destroy the relationship, and we say in another aspect, even though it's true that in some aspects we do have a Kal v'Chomer, but since in other aspects we don't, so we can no longer say perforce that the consequent comes out, because it's not an absolute that one is more machmir than the other. So that's the classic way to attack the second type of Nedama syllogism, is to say the relationship of Kal v'Chomer is not what you thought it was, because we found in another book here the table was reversed. Here's the third aspect, which is very, very, very interesting, because it doesn't directly attack the Kal v'Chomer, but it says that the Kal v'Chomer can't be true, even though we don't know why. We wanted to learn the case of the Nasi from the case of the Yachid Ba'amra. We said like this: we said the Yachid doesn't bring achatos on a sin that he discovers later on. But he does bring an Asham Toli. He does bring this korban Asham Toli if he ate a piece of meat, one of which may have been Chaleb. The Nasi, Shemevi al Hivado Zachar. He is much more machmir. Here's Kal V'chomer, right? The other one is Chom V'kal. The Nasi, which is much more machmir because he definitely brings a korban zachar when he finds that he didn't bear. So then, since he's much more machmir, we want to say, ain't no dingy in the Asham Toli. Then certainly, the different case of Asham Toli, he certainly should bring. So in this, here we have a Kal V'chomer, and we want to produce the result that the Nasi does bring an Asham Toli. Sasru adin ma'omra, Mashiach yochiach. We destroyed this Kal V'chomer, this Hekesh, by saying we can destroy it because the case of Mashiach proved that it cannot be. Why? He's maybe al Hivado Zachar. He is similar to the Nasi because he also brings on achatos, on a sin that he learns about, a male offering. The aim may be Asham Toli, but the result is not there. He doesn't bring in Asham Toli. So we found a case of Mashiach similar to the case of Nasi, which we wanted to derive his din through Kal V'chomer, and we see that the result is not the result that we expected. So we can no longer perforce, we can no longer say the hechrach that the Nasi brings the Asham Toli. Why? Because we have a similar case, the Mashiach, which has the same quality that he's maybe al Hivado Zachar, the same exact quality as the Nasi, but lo and behold does not have the result. So even though we don't know why the Kal V'chomer shouldn't work, but the very fact that we found a similar case to the case that we want to derive with a different din, not the din that we wanted to predicate, so we no longer can make the Kal V'chomer. Since we found a nose, in this case Mashiach, comparable to the case that we want to derive to the Nasi, she'ein bo osim su, which doesn't have that predicate. Okay, so since we found a similar case to the case that we want to derive from Kal V'chomer, we also break the Kal V'chomer. So this is, again, critical, basic Aleph Beit thinking that must be mastered in understanding how to, on what basis a Hekesh Dimion is true, and how we are going to deny the premise. If you want to deny the premise, again, as a summary, of a Hekesh built on Dimion, you have to break the Dimion. If you want to deny the consequent of a premise based on Dimion, you have to break the Dimion between the two subjects. If you want to deny the consequent of a Hekesh built on Kal V'chomer, or Chom V'kal, you have to show that in another aspect, the tables of the relationship is not Kal V'chomer, Chom V'kal. And the third way is you just produce a similar case to the case that you want, to the derivative case of the Kal V'chomer, and you show it doesn't have the desired predicate. And therefore, we no longer can use the Kal V'chomer. We don't know why, but we say the Kal V'chomer cannot be derived because the similar case should also have the same din, and it doesn't. Those are the three basic methods of destroying a Hekesh through Dimion. Now we'll go to the third type of Hekesh. Od v'tera hizbonos, sheshnei minim shem echad kodem ve'echad nimshach, yachvichu zeh muzeh. Also, in our basic God-given pattern of thinking, is that two subjects, one which is the consequent of a precedent, they will force each other. What does that mean? Perishel. Shebehimotzei hakodim yemotzei hanimshach. When you find the precedent, then you will define the consequent. Ubeheder hanimshach And if we find that the nimshach is not there, the consequent is not there, then the precedent won't be there. So I just wrote in the two classic ways in English of this Hekesh. It's called Hekesh Totally, is going to say, because it's built not on a categorical premise, not on a comparative premise, but on a totally an if-then premise. And here they are. If A then B, then given A, I know B. If it's raining, the streets are wet. So it's raining, and therefore the streets must be wet. That's the classical if-then. Also, we have another inference that we can make from an if-then. If A then B, if it's not B, is true, therefore not A. Okay, if it's raining, the streets are wet. If the streets are not wet, it is not raining. What's the other possibility? You could say that if B then A, that is not mukhrach. Okay, and that's why it's not listed here. If the streets are wet, it must be raining. It's not true. Streets could be wet because the fire department there, the sanitation department is then wet down the streets. The only time that you could say if B is not, if B then A, it's this one, is only if only A is B. If only A is B, then if I don't have B, I don't have A, I'm sorry, it's here, okay? But if I just have a simple if-then, if A then B, so the only thing that's mukhrach is the negation of the predicate is the negation of the subject. If not B, then not A. But the affirmation of the predicate, B, does not mean I have A unless it was if and only if. If and only if A, then B. In that case, it will work, but it's not mukhrach in all cases, and that's why it's not mentioned here. Derech mashal. In Pesachim, if you hold that he holds like Rabbi Akiva, nisnei nami revia b'truma b'chamisha b'kodesh, then he should have learned the case in a revia b'truma and a chamishi in hegdesh. Hine ha'hechrach no sedam yisod zeh shamarno sheyeh v'hainu ki zeh vadai. It's vadai that what. She'im haya sobek Rabbi Akiva, if he held like Rabbi Akiva, haya nimshach mizeh shehaya shana chamishi. He should have spoken about the cases. You also held in the cases of Rabbi and Chamishi. Kaven shana rom she'eno shona Rabbi Chamishi. Since we have the denial of the consequent, and Cain v'anai she'eno sobek Rabbi Akiva. So this is therefore he definitely doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva. Hine Hadin hazeh mikra hekesh totally lefi shebdama somama totally. This is called hekesh totally because the hagdama is totally. So we showed if A then B, if not B, if he doesn't hold Rabbi Chamishi, if not B, so he can't hold like if you hold like Rabbi Akiva, if A, then you have to hold B, Rabbi and Chamishi. Since you don't hold Chamishi, then you can't hold like Rabbi Akiva. That's this example. Okay. We have one more hekesh to do, and that's the hekesh machalik, based on a member machalik, which is A or B. Let's do that. Od miteva. By the way, this hekesh Torah is used again countless times in the Gemara when you ask kasha ihachi, for instance. If so, it's always a hekesh Torah, meaning if what you're saying is true, then the consequent is going to be against you. Of course, what you're saying is not true, then the consequent will fall down. Derech mashal. Let's do. I'm sorry, the last one based on the mechalek. Old meteva his bonus she nasuin shonim mukhrach emote echad mehem levado menose. So we have another thing based in our minds, based on beteva in our thinking. Shenosuim shonim. If we have different types of predicates, shemukhrach imotze echad mihen levado menose. if we know that only one of those in the su and one of those predication must be found in the subject, so when we do find one of those predicates, then all the other predicates have to be not there. And the other thing that must be true is if we have all these predicates and they're machalik, they're exclusive, so if we then deny all the predicates except one, so that's called the affirmation of the remaining one. So here we just wrote it out in a simple English formulation. If we have a subject and we know it's either A, B, or C, so once we find that the subject is A, so then we can say definitely it's not B or C. Similarly, if S is either A, B, or C, the same machalik statement. If S is not A or B, then it must be C. Once we deny these other possibilities, then it must be affirmation of the third law. Okay? So that's the two basic ways we're going to use the Hekesh Machalek. The affirmation of one will be the denial of the others. The affirmation of one predicate will be the denial of the others. And the denial of all the others will be the affirmation of the one remaining. Okay. Derech Mashal. It says in Pesachim Shma Minei Havara Lechalek Yotzesa. We have a problem with the Malach of fire that's written in the Chumash. Is it Lechalek? Is it to give, when people do a lot of Malach simultaneously, the reason why it was singled out, fire, in the Chumash, was it to say that they each get an individual punishment? Or no, the other possibility was singled out in the Chumash to be unusual because it's allowed and the other ones are chayav covers, and it's not. No said, Zeh halimud al yisud hazeshes charn kihine. Let's get the Hekesh Machalek. Havara, lighting a fire, was singled out specifically in the Chumash. That means lo yotze ela. Why was it singled out? Lechalek or allowed. Either to say that doing many of them simultaneously you have to get punished for each one, or no, that it's unusual and it's allowed, only allowed. Since we deny this part of the Hekesh Machalek, then it has to be that it came to be it came Machalek, to say that each one, it gets a din you make many simultaneously. So that's an example here. It's either A or B. Here we only have two possibilities. So if it's not A, it's a denial of one of the predicates, is the affirmation of the other. Okay. V'chein, k'she'omru eichidami. Either lo asu be'eden mani yedinan. Elav the asu be'eden. So there's only two possibilities here also. We're talking about a shomer that's supposed to receive, he's a shliach, supposed to receive an item, and he has to receive it either with witnesses or without witnesses, right? So the Gemara wants to prove, the Gemara says, if it was done without witnesses, how do we know he's a shliach at all? So the denial of done without witnesses is the affirmation that it must be done with witnesses. Okay, the same type of thing. One of the two has to be. He did a shlichus, he was makabel shlichus with Adam or without Adam. Since we see it must have been with Adam, if he wasn't with Adam, it's having a shliach b'klal. So muchlak should also the Adam. So once we see that's impossible that he did it without Adam, so it must be that he has to do it with Adam. V'hinei din ze nikra hekesh machalek. This type of hekesh is called a hekesh machalek. Why? Lefi shabdama so mama machalek, because the habdama is based on a mama machalek. It's an A or B situation. O nasu ze, o nasu ze, yesh v'nosei ze. Here's the mechalik. Either predicate A or B is attached to subject A, or lehefek. Either subject A or B is attached to predicate, to a certain predicate. O lenosei ze, o lenosei ze, yayache ze lenasu, commotion man lamala, as we explained. Or the certain predicate is applicable, the certain subjects to one of two subjects are applicable to a certain predicate, as we mentioned above. So that's the last type of hekesh, and that concludes our discussion of the hekeshim. So we can just do a quick review. We learned that there's really 5 different types of hekeshim. The first one is the classic syllogism based on called hekesh mofti, starting out with a all statement. Once we have that, all av malach is a chayav skila, then we find a prat in av malach, like kosa is chayav skila, then we produce our result. That's the hekesh mofti. The second group was based on dimion, that two subjects are equivalent to each other, and therefore we find in one subject, there we should find in the other, like here with the yachid and the nasi. They're similar because they're not seaboard. Therefore, what we find in the yachid, maybe Archim should be found there. And we said there's a variant of learning a hekesh through similarity, which is called the kal v'chomer. If the chomer in this case, for instance, has a din. Let's go call them again. Uma'im hayachid she'en mevi al hiro dozocha mevi ashim taloi. The more Homer case, that's mevi al hiro dozocha eno din she'evi ashim taloi. So we went from the kal case of a yachid to a Homer case of a nasi. We said it can also work the opposite way around. We said that was more than a dimion. It's a dimion plus a relationship of kal v'chomer. And finally, in the third position, we said there's the if-then. If A is true, then B must be true. So given A, I know B, and if I do not find B, then I cannot find A. That's the classic hekesh toloi, two inferences that must be made. And finally, the hekesh mechalik, where the subject is either A, B, or C. So I know the predication of A will be the denial of B and C, or I know the denial of B and C will be the affirmation of A. Okay, and the same situation could go on with 3 subjects. If I have either subject A, B, and C has predicate X, so the same thing will happen. If I say A has predicate X, then I know that the B and C subjects don't. And if I deny that A and B, for instance, don't have the predicate X, so then C must have it. This is a very, very basic fundamental of learning. This is how we bring proofs to things. This is how we extend our knowledge into different cases. This is also how the Gemara will fight, as he said, with machlokas, whether there's a dimion or not a dimion, whether something's a kal v'chomer or not a kal v'chomer. In the case of machalek, all of a sudden you thought that there was only 2 situations. It's either A or B. That's the classic dilemma. And I caught you both ways. If you go this way, you're caught. If you go the other way, well, all of a sudden you'll find a third possibility. These are the basic foundations of many, many, many Gemaras, many, many extensions from particular cases to global cases, and the foundation of many, many machlokas. That finishes our discussion of Toldos and Ezra Hashem. Next week, we'll just have to discuss whether we should do a review and to see this live in action in that case of Baba Kama, or we should go to the third category, which is how to bring, on what basis do we say a statement or a syllogism is true or not true, the foundation of bringing proofs and being so good at proofs. So that's the end of our discussion today. If there's not any questions, we'll pick it up next week.